5 years after being wrongfully arrested, she walked back into the same courtroom that once buried her. But this time, she didn't bow. In just 7 minutes, she exposed an entire system: a judge, a billionaire, and a city councilman. How did someone who once stood as a victim bring down the three most powerful men in the city? One by one. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The walls of courtroom 9B didn't echo justice. They absorbed it. And at the center sat Judge Raymond Carver, a man who didn't need to raise his voice. One look from him could shut down the boldest attorney. For over 2 decades, he ruled this court like a tyrant in a robe, bending the law to his will, untouchable, unquestioned. No one challenged him. Those who tried were crushed, quietly, thoroughly. But this time, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another lawyer. She stepped through those doors not to argue, but to confront. 5 years ago, she'd been dragged into this very courtroom in handcuffs, falsely arrested, humiliated, discarded. Carver had watched her suffer, unmoved, indifferent. That moment had changed her. It ignited something cold and sharp inside her. A promise. One day she'd return, and she'd come back ready. Now she stood on the same floor where her dignity was once torn apart. Only this time, she wasn't the one on trial. Today she brought the evidence. Today she held the power. And today, the man who once smirked at her downfall would finally learn what it meant to be judged. Judge Raymond Carver looked up slowly, like a man irritated by the very presence of interruption. His pen paused mid-scratch, suspended in the air as his eyes locked onto Jasmine with a mixture of boredom and disdain. Then came the smirk, a slow, serpentine curl of the lip that said, "You're nothing, and I know it." "Miss Crockett," he began, voice dripping with sarcasm, "please tell me you didn't get all dressed up just to waste my time. This isn't a school debate. You don't get points for confidence." He let the words hang, then leaned forward slightly. "You're here to accuse one of the city's top developers of fraud? Seriously? What did you bring? Some blurry printouts and a bad attitude?" The gallery chuckled. The defense team grinned, relaxing like they'd seen this movie before. Carver added with a scoff, "Next time you want to play lawyer, maybe practice in front of a mirror first. Or better yet, try a parking ticket case. You might actually win one of those." Still, Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood motionless, a steel post in a storm of condescension. Every inch of her body screamed control. She had heard worse, years ago in this very courtroom when Carver had watched her get humiliated in chains. Back then, she hadn't had a voice. Back then, she'd left this place with her name in the mud and her spirit in pieces. But today was different. She wasn't here to plead. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to burn the foundation down. Her voice sliced through the air, calm, measured, devastating. "Your Honor, I'm here to expose a systematic laundering operation that's drained millions from the city and funneled them through fabricated charities. The orchestrator is Thomas Eldridge, a developer who's wrapped fraud in philanthropy for over a decade, and I have evidence to prove every word." She reached into her case, flipping open a folder with precision. The room held its breath. The smile on Carver's face stiffened. He leaned back, folding his arms like a man watching a mosquito buzz around. "Let me guess," he said, his tone sharper now. "You dug up some documents off Google, got fired up, and decided you're going to save the world?" He shook his head slowly. "Listen, I don't have time for junior detectives who watch too many courtroom dramas. This is real life, Miss Crockett. Not your personal revenge tour." He let out a short laugh. "Honestly, I'm surprised you made it this far. But let's not pretend you're here to deliver justice. You're here to prove something. To yourself." Jasmine's face didn't move. She didn't blink. She only leaned slightly forward, letting the weight of her next words settle like iron. "I'm exactly where I mean to be, Your Honor. And no amount of your sneering changes the fact that the evidence is real, the crimes are documented, and Mr. Eldridge is about to have a very long conversation with the law." Her tone was ice over fire, controlled fury honed by years of fighting battles no one saw. The courtroom shifted. The gallery fell silent. Carver's theatrics were met not with laughter, but unease. Somewhere, even the bailiff looked down. Carver's lip twitched, but he didn't respond. He didn't have to. Not yet. But the air had changed. For the first time in a long time, someone had refused to bow, and the mighty Judge Carver had finally met a voice that cut deeper than his own. Jasmine took a breath, centered herself, and placed the first document flat on the table, facing the judge, angled just so. "Let's begin with the bank transfers," she said, her tone even but firm. "These records come directly from Wellsfield Bank, showing 3 separate wire transfers totaling $1.2 million from Eldridge Development Corporation to supposed nonprofit organizations." She turned the next page with deliberate calm. "These 3 entities, Hope Horizon Foundation, Citizens for Clean Start, and Healing Harbor Trust, don't exist in the IRS's nonprofit registry or the state's charity database. In other words, these aren't real charities. They're ghost accounts." Her voice didn't waver. "Each transfer was listed in Eldridge's books as a philanthropic donation. But that money wasn't helping the poor. It was helping him dodge taxes and launder funds." The courtroom shifted. There was a buzz of recognition among the journalists. Well, this wasn't guesswork. It was real. But Carver leaned back in his chair like he'd just been handed a bedtime story. "Miss Crockett," he said with a sigh, "this is what you're leading with? Some shaky bank statements and a bunch of names that sound like summer camps?" He let out a dry laugh. "I could name 3 fake charities off the top of my head. That doesn't make it a crime. You're going to need a hell of a lot more than Google searches and photocopies to hold this court's attention." Jasmine didn't flinch. "These aren't internet printouts. They're certified financial records from the bank, obtained by subpoena." She pointed to the stamp on each page. "They show exact routing numbers, time-stamped transactions, and internal memos indicating these payments were deliberately mislabeled to avoid triggering IRS audits." Carver raised a brow and waved a hand like swatting a fly. "Ah, yes, the grand conspiracy theory, a shadowy cabal of nonprofits, forged in the fires of Excel spreadsheets and coffee-stained receipts." He turned to the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've found ourselves the star of next week's courtroom podcast. The curious case of the clueless crusader." The defense team roared with laughter. Jasmine heard it, every snide chuckle, but she refused to let it in. She simply turned to the next document. "Let's talk about the construction permits," she said. "These are fast-track approvals from the city planning department, all processed within 48 hours, unheard of in standard practice." She lifted another page. "Each of these permits bypassed required environmental reviews and community impact assessments, and every one of them ended up directly benefiting Eldridge-owned properties." The courtroom tensed. For a moment, the echo of her words hung over the room like a blade. Carver's expression hardened. "So now you're accusing the entire planning department of corruption?" he snapped. "What's next? Aliens pulling building permits from orbit?" "Not aliens, Your Honor. Just money," Jasmine replied, stepping closer. "Because in each of these cases, the fast approvals were followed by large campaign donations and quiet property transfers, benefiting a single developer again and again." There it was, the first flicker in his eyes. Fear or rage. Hard to tell. But she had hit something. Carver leaned forward, voice sharp. "You're dancing dangerously close to contempt, Ms. Crockett, throwing accusations like spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks. I've seen high school debates with more substance." Jasmine ignored him. She pulled out a photo. "This is the registered address of the Hope Horizon Foundation, one of the so-called charities Eldridge used." She held it up. "Taken 3 days ago. It's a fenced-in vacant lot behind an abandoned gas station. No building, no staff, no services." Gasps rippled through the room. The tension was no longer theatrical. It was real. She turned the next page. "And this," she said, lifting a tax filing, "is the foundation's latest financial report. It claims $875,000 in wages for 5 employees. All 5 names trace back to either deceased individuals or identity-masked shell corporations located offshore. One of them, Marion Foxley, has been dead since 1998. The courtroom erupted in whispers and stunned expressions. One reporter stood up mid-note, too shocked to sit. Jasmine kept her focus on the bench. "This isn't speculation, Your Honor. It's fraud. Documented, verified, cross-checked, and notarized. She took a slow step forward, unblinking. And every one of these frauds was enabled by silence, ignored by oversight, and hidden in plain sight for years. Carver's fingers tightened on the edge of his bench. He wasn't smirking anymore. And Jasmine knew. This time he wasn't laughing because this time he was afraid. Jasmine slid her hand across the table, retrieving a folder marked in bold red ink. Internal documents. West Point Zone 14. It was the kind of folder you don't open until you're ready for everything to change. The air in the courtroom had already grown heavy, but now it hung dense, expectant. What I'm about to present, she said loud enough for every row to hear, is a zoning application filed for the West Point redevelopment project, a multi-million-dollar expansion that directly benefited Mr. Eldridge's real estate empire. She paused, opened the folder, and carefully removed a single-page approval memo. This document, submitted to the City Planning Office, includes the usual property specs, legal descriptors, tax IDs. But here's what makes it interesting. She stepped forward, placing it on the bench like a warning shot. Down here at the bottom, on the administrative review section, there's a name. Her eyes lifted. Your name, Judge Carver. The room didn't gasp yet. It froze. Total, perfect stillness. Even the reporters who had been whispering into microphones stopped mid-sentence. Jasmine didn't give them time to breathe. You are listed here as an external reviewer, not as a judge presiding over a case, but as someone directly consulted for approval. And this was during the same period Eldridge was under federal investigation for illegal zoning maneuvers and shell donations. So, again, for the record, her voice slowed, sharpened. Why is your name on this internal approval form for a private developer? Carver's head jerked up like he'd been struck. His lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile, more of a snarl. What the hell do you think you're doing? He barked. The words slammed against the courtroom walls. You want to stand in my courtroom and toss mud like a tabloid reporter? You're either desperate, delusional, or both. He snatched the document from the bench, scanned it with trembling hands, then slammed it down with a violence that echoed. This is a smear tactic, pure and simple, a pathetic stunt to salvage a failing case. His voice rose, unhinged. Bailiff, remove that from the evidence tray. Now. Jasmine didn't blink. That's a public document, she said evenly, filed under FOIA Code 103-C. I have a certified copy from the planning office, and a digital version with metadata if you'd prefer. Her tone wasn't defiant, it was surgical, the kind of calm that makes angry men more afraid. Would you like me to submit both? Carver's face flushed a deeper shade of red. He slammed the gavel once, then again, harder, faster. You think this is a game? You think you can come in here with a bag of half-baked paperwork and challenge the authority of this bench? He leaned forward, finger stabbing the air like a weapon. You're in contempt. I swear to God, another word, and I will have you removed, disbarred, and blacklisted from every court in this state. You are nothing in this room. But Jasmine stepped forward again, closer to the bench. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And yet I'm the one holding your name on a government document tied to a known money launderer. She laid down a second sheet. This is a city communications memo between Eldridge's project manager and a contact listed only as RC, referenced as a green light on zoning resistance. She glanced at the judge. Your initials, Judge Carver. Same time frame, same project. The gallery finally erupted. Reporters scrambled to record every word. Phones were raised. The room shook with the shift in momentum, like a tide changing direction mid-storm. Carver stood up, full height, gavel raised like a war club. You arrogant little fraud, he roared. You think you've uncovered some deep state scandal? You're nothing but a mouthpiece for lies and innuendo. I've spent 25 years on this bench, and I won't be dragged down by some overzealous crusader with a grudge and a folder of trash. You spent 25 years making sure no one asked questions? Jasmine snapped back. But today I'm asking them. And the only thing that's trash, she pointed to the document, is the trail of fake charities, forged zoning fast tracks, and backroom deals you helped bury. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a war zone. Raw, exposed, Carver's hand trembled. The gavel didn't come down. He looked around the room like a drowning man, searching for allies, but even the bailiff had stepped back. Jasmine stepped into the silence. I'm not accusing. I'm showing. I'm not implying. I'm proving. And you can bang your gavel all you want, but the truth is louder now. She tapped the document one final time. So tell me, Your Honor, do you want to answer the question? Or should I let the feds ask it instead? The gavel never fell again, because in that moment, Carver had already lost the room. Carver hadn't said a word in nearly a full minute. His eyes, bloodshot with tension, darted across the room like a man trapped in a burning house, looking for exits, finding none. Jasmine let the pressure build. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to gloat. The silence was saying enough. Then, without missing a beat, she flipped open a new folder and spoke with calm precision, as if reading the final chapter of a book she already knew the ending to. Let's move to direct testimony, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. This is a notarized affidavit from Elena Marcos, former assistant property manager for Eldridge Holdings. She worked at the downtown office for 4 years. Her job was mostly logistics, checking mail, confirming deliveries, managing access codes. But during her final year, she was assigned one very specific, very unusual task. She held the document up. Every Tuesday between 8:30 and 9 a.m., Elena was told to take a sealed envelope, unmarked, to the back entrance of the West Point zoning office. She was instructed to smile, say nothing, and hand it off to the same man each week. She was paid a $500 bonus for each delivery, which was always in cash. She never signed anything. She was never told what was inside. Jasmine turned the page, but she remembers details. The man who took the envelope wore the same cufflinks each time, black enamel with silver trim. She thought they were unique. She described them in her testimony. Then Jasmine pulled out a printed photo, zoomed in from city security footage taken at the zoning office's rear entrance. Here's the man who received the envelope, she said, placing it where the judge could see. Taken 6 months ago, time-stamped, enhanced, and right there, on his wrists, those exact same cufflinks. The footage shows him entering the building immediately after the handoff and staying for 17 minutes. Then he exits and walks directly to a vehicle registered to an Eldridge company account. The courtroom had gone silent again, not with boredom, but with collective dread. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't a wild theory. This was organized, systemic, and Jasmine had the blueprint. But she wasn't finished. She reached for another folder, thicker this time, heavier with consequence. Next, we have transaction records from a local business, Copperstone Catering. They're well known in the business district. Eldridge Holdings used them for luncheons, mixers, staff retreats. She opened to the first invoice. This one is dated March 17th. It shows an order for 20 boxed lunches delivered to Suite 4B at the Horizon Executive Center. She held up a map. That suite is registered under Crossmark Consulting, a name that doesn't exist on the state business registry. No website, no phone listing. The building's front desk confirms no signage, no registered office hours. Jasmine pressed on. Between January and July, Crossmark Consulting received over $82,000 in so-called consulting fees from entities later identified as shell charities, Hope Horizon, Citizens for Clean Start, and several others with direct ties to Eldridge. These fees were laundered through vendor reimbursements, private deposits, and ghost invoices. They were routed through 2 P.O. boxes and at least one offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. She tapped the page. We verified all of it, traced every dollar, and there's a direct path from those fake nonprofits to that shell consulting firm to the personal accounts of people sitting in this courtroom today. Still, the judge didn't move, but the courtroom did. People shifted in their seats. Whispers rolled like thunder across the rows. Reporters scribbled frantically. One cameraman zoomed in on the judge's face, which had gone pale, drained of its usual superiority. And Jasmine? She stood like stone, her voice steady, her stance grounded. This isn't theory. This isn't drama. This is the anatomy of a cover operation, piece by piece, person by person, transaction by transaction. All of it designed to hide the truth. She turned the next page. And this, she said, holding up one last statement, is where it ends. A wire confirmation dated April 3rd, $14,500 transferred from Crossmark to a private law firm that later represented Eldridge in a zoning dispute. Paid in full. Labeled as Community Liaison Services. She let that hang in the air, then looked Carver straight in the eyes. Who was that liaison, Your Honor? And why does the money leave Crossmark 2 days after your chambers denied a motion against Eldridge's development permit? Boom. The fuse was lit. The courtroom wasn't silent. It was holding its breath. Every eye was on Jasmine, every camera lens fixed. She reached into her briefcase and drew out a slim black evidence box. There was no flourish, no dramatic glance. Just a quiet, methodical movement, like someone who knew exactly how much damage she was about to unleash. She opened the lid, pulled out a compact digital recorder, and held it up with 2 fingers. Your Honor, she said clearly, her voice controlled like a slow trigger pull. This is a verified audio file collected as part of a sealed federal investigation into corruption within the West Point zoning office. It is accompanied by a forensic report confirming its authenticity, and its chain of custody includes sign-off by federal agents and a federal judge. She turned the device slightly, giving the gallery a clear view. With your permission, I'd like to play it for the court. Carver didn't speak. He didn't nod. He didn't blink, but his hand gripped the arm of his chair just a little tighter. Jasmine pressed play. The room filled with the soft crackle of an ambient recording, background noise, footsteps, the sound of a door shutting. Then, keep it quiet. I'll handle the paperwork. Just make sure Eldridge gets what he needs. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Judge Raymond Carver's voice. The reaction was instantaneous. One of the jurors actually flinched. A woman in the front row gasped so hard it echoed. The stenographer dropped her fingers from the keys. The press gallery erupted in motion. Reporters scrambling to record, phones raised, mouths moving silently in disbelief. It wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a bomb site. Carver stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped. His face had gone from white to blotched red, his eyes wide, unblinking, manic. That is a lie, he shouted, his voice cracking like the floor beneath him. That is an illegal recording. A deep fake. It's been tampered with. He pounded the gavel over and over as if he could break reality into silence. I won't allow this circus, this witch hunt. This courtroom belongs to me. But the power had shifted, and it wasn't going back. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words landed like hammer blows. The recording was authorized by Federal Warrant 784-C. It was captured through a legal wiretap placed on the offices of Eldridge Holdings during an ongoing financial crimes investigation. The voice print was confirmed by 2 independent analysts. There is no edit, no splice, no AI manipulation. That is your voice, your words, and your implication in a criminal arrangement. Carver's mouth opened, but there was nothing behind it. No clever comeback, no sharp dismissal, only air. She continued. And for those still unsure, I've submitted the full transcript to the court clerk, along with a sworn affidavit from Agent Paul Henders of the FBI, stating that the original audio file was obtained from a secure data node and passed through 3 layers of federal validation. She paused just enough to let the weight settle. This isn't hearsay, Your Honor. It's evidence, and you are not above it. The room didn't breathe. Then Jasmine reached into another folder, this one thinner, but more lethal. But we're not done, because audio is one thing. Paper trails tell the rest. She pulled out a certified transaction log stamped with Belmont National Bank's seal. This document confirms a direct deposit of $200,000 into the personal account of Angela Rivers, your sister-in-law, on March 11th of this year. She turned to the second page. The source of that deposit was a private fund held by a charitable organization controlled by Thomas Eldridge. That fund received expedited tax-exempt status just 5 days before the transfer. The tension shifted again. It wasn't shock anymore. It was anger. The gallery began to murmur. Carver's face drained of color, his mouth twitching like a man trying to speak in a dream he couldn't escape. The reporters were standing now, Phones were live streaming, and somewhere near the back, one juror covered her mouth with both hands. Jasmine walked forward. The transfer was flagged by internal auditors for irregular activity. It was marked consulting fee. But Ms. Rivers has no consulting license, no recorded hours, no signed contract, just a name on a payout after a favor was granted. She dropped the document onto the bench. The sound it made was soft, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Carver sank into his chair as if gravity had grown cruel. Jasmine stared straight at him, not as a subordinate, not as a lawyer, as a woman who had been humiliated by this very man 5 years earlier, and who now stood over the ruins of his untouchable world. "This court deserves to know who has been speaking from the bench," she said, voice steady, clear. "And today they've heard you, in your own voice, in your own dealings, loud and clear." The gavel sat still, and for the first time in his career, Judge Raymond Carver had nothing left to say. Then it happened. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They exploded inward with a force that silenced everything. No knock, no warning, just the hard clack of leather soles on marble tile and the unmistakable glint of federal authority. 3 agents stormed in, suits sharp, movements tight, their jackets pulled back just enough to reveal holstered weapons and the gold of their badges. The courtroom turned like a wave crashing against itself. Jurors leaning over the box, reporters gasping. One camera nearly dropped to the floor in shock. And at the center of it all, Jasmine stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Carver, her breath calm, her body unmoving, as if she had seen this moment 1,000 times in her mind before it ever came true. The lead agent spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Judge Raymond Carver," he announced slowly, clearly, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, and abuse of judicial authority. Step away from the bench and place your hands where I can see them." His words didn't echo, they hit, like a door slamming shut on a legacy built in shadows. And just like that, the courtroom no longer belonged to Carver. The illusion shattered. For one long, horrifying second, Carver didn't move. He stared down at the agents like they were an illusion, like this couldn't possibly be real. Then he snapped. "No!" he roared, his voice suddenly high-pitched, cracking under the weight of collapse. He surged forward in his chair and slammed both fists on the bench, the gavel flying off and landing in the aisle with a hollow clatter. "This is my courtroom. No one arrests me in my courtroom." The words weren't commands anymore. They were the last gasps of a man drowning in the very authority he once wielded like a weapon. The gallery recoiled. Reporters fumbled with recorders. A juror pressed her hand over her mouth, visibly trembling. The courtroom wasn't watching a judge anymore. They were watching a man unravel. Carver's face turned a deep, blistered red as he pointed toward Jasmine with a shaking hand. "She set me up," he screamed. "She's behind this. This is political. It's all lies." He spun to the jury, to the press, to the agents, his voice spiraling. "I have friends in Washington. You hear me? I'll have every one of you disbarred. I'll—" "Judge Carver," the lead agent interrupted, voice cold and measured. "Do not resist. If you do not comply, we will use force." It was over. The room knew it. Carver tried to step backward toward the side door behind his bench, the same door he used for years to avoid the people he sentenced, the reporters he dodged, the consequences he delayed. But there would be no back exit this time. 2 agents stepped in, moving with precision. No struggle, no yelling. They flanked him like they had rehearsed it. One grabbed his wrist, the other guided his arm back, slow, deliberate. The sound of the cuffs clicking closed echoed through the chamber like thunder. Click, click, done. A judge, the judge, who had silenced so many with a glance, now stood powerless, cuffed, trembling in front of flashing cameras in a gallery full of the people he once ruled over, like a tyrant cloaked in law. His robe hung awkwardly on his frame, the fabric suddenly too large, too empty. It no longer symbolized authority. It looked like a costume, worn by a man pretending to be more than he ever was. He twisted violently, trying to shake off the agents, yelling again. This isn't over. You hear me, Crockett? You think this makes you a hero? I built this city. You're just another headline. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply watched as the man who once humiliated her, who dismissed her, disrespected her, tried to bury her in his courtroom, was now being walked down the center aisle, his head down, eyes wild, wrists bound. The press followed like sharks, shouting questions, flashes strobing across his face as the weight of justice pressed down on him for the first time in his life. He was no longer Judge Carver. He was Raymond Carver, defendant, suspect, fallen king. And as the doors closed behind him, leaving nothing but his echo and the bitter stench of a broken empire, Jasmine stood taller than ever. She didn't have to say a word, because justice had spoken for her. The echo of Carver's last desperate outburst hadn't even faded when Jasmine turned, slow and deliberate, to face the man seated just a few feet away. Thomas Eldridge, the king of concrete, the empire builder, a man who once bulldozed entire blocks of neighborhoods to erect glass towers in their place. He'd watched Jasmine the entire trial with the smug confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. But now, he looked like a statue melting under heat. Sweat pooled under his collar. His tie was crooked. His eyes, darting left and right, searched for a way out that didn't exist. Jasmine walked over, each step echoing louder than the last. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her tone carried enough weight to silence a room that had just witnessed a judge taken down in chains. She stopped in front of Eldridge, looked him dead in the eye, and said with lethal precision, "You're next, unless you tell the truth. Right here, right now." The words hit harder than any piece of evidence, because for the first time, Eldridge realized what Jasmine already knew. This wasn't just about bad deals and dirty money. This was about legacy, about survival, and his was about to burn. Eldridge tried to speak, but the words clung to his throat. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Finally, he swallowed hard and shook his head, trembling. "If I talk," he whispered, barely audible, "I'll be dead before the ink dries. You don't understand. I wasn't running the show." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then tell me who was." He hesitated again, eyes wide with the panic of a man standing at the edge of a cliff with fire behind him. "They'll kill me," he repeated. "You think Carver was the worst of them? He was a pawn. That's all. He followed orders because he owed too many favors and didn't have the spine to say no." His voice cracked. "The real head is still out there, still clean, still smiling on TV while people like me take the fall." The gallery leaned in. One reporter forgot to breathe. A court clerk dropped her pen. Jasmine's voice cut through the silence. "Say his name." Eldridge looked at her, then at the exit where Carver had been dragged away. His whole body shook now, like a man breaking open from the inside. "It was Hayes," he said finally, the words tearing out like confession and curse all at once. "Councilman Daniel Hayes, he runs it all." There it was, the next piece of the puzzle, the real puppeteer behind the curtain. Jasmine's eyes didn't widen, her breath didn't change, but inside the room shifted again. Only this time, it wasn't collapsing. It was expanding. The game board was bigger than anyone thought. Carver was never the king. He was just the front man, the noise, the shadow to distract the world from the real figure pulling every string from City Hall. Eldridge slumped in his chair, like just saying the name had drained the last of his strength. "You have no idea," he muttered. "He's got eyes in the planning commission, the finance board, the mayor's office. He handpicks the charities, the Shell Corps, the judges. I was just the wallet. I moved the money. But he designed the whole machine." Jasmine nodded slowly, her voice low but razor sharp. "And now you're going to help dismantle it." Eldridge looked like he was going to vomit. "If I talk, I'll end up in a ditch." He looked around, desperate. "I need protection. Federal custody. I'll give you files, emails, voice messages, but I want full immunity and witness relocation." "You're not negotiating," Jasmine replied coldly. "You're surviving, and right now, survival starts by proving you're more useful alive than buried in a scandal." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Agent Henders, I've got your next witness and your next target. The agents at the back of the courtroom stepped forward as Jasmine flipped open the final file in her briefcase. It was thick, too thick for just one man's crime. The folder was labeled Hayes Operations, Confidential. She had already been building this case. Carver had been the door, Eldridge the key. But Hayes? Hayes was the fortress, and she was just getting started. Eldridge sank deeper into his chair. The weight of what he had done and what he had just unleashed hung around him like chains. But he didn't resist. He didn't deny. Because he knew there was nowhere left to hide. The courtroom slowly began to stir again, like it had just come out of a trance. Reporters whispering to producers, officers talking into radios. But all of it was background noise to Jasmine, who stood at the center of it all, unshaken. She had come to fight a case. Now she had uncovered a war. She looked down at Eldridge one last time. The truth was never going to set you free, she said quietly, but it might buy you a seat on the right side of history. And then she turned toward the cameras, toward the press, toward the city that had ignored this corruption for far too long. The wheels were already in motion. The headlines were being typed. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Councilman Hayes was next. And this time, he wouldn't see her coming. Night had already blanketed the city by the time Jasmine arrived at Eldridge's downtown office. But inside the federal SUV, no one was thinking about the hour. She sat in the back seat, silent, her eyes scanning the windows of the looming Horizon Tower. It was sleek, steel glass, and arrogant, just like the man who built it. But behind that polished exterior was the vault. And inside that vault, if Eldridge was telling the truth, was the kind of evidence that could do what no courtroom plea or viral headline ever could: expose the whole system. The agents moved with urgency, securing the perimeter, flashing IDs at the sleepy overnight security guard who barely had time to ask questions. Jasmine led the way toward the elevator, clutching the code that Eldridge had whispered like a deathbed confession: 381592. The 20th floor was too quiet, too polished, a vacuum of guilt pretending to be professionalism. The hallway lights flickered to life as motion sensors activated, casting long shadows over marble tiles. Jasmine's heels clicked sharply, each step steady, purposeful. They reached the main office, a sprawling suite built like a throne room, floor-to-ceiling windows, $10,000 leather chairs, glass partitions that couldn't hide the rot within. There, one agent said, pointing to a framed photo of Eldridge and Councilman Hayes shaking hands at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Behind it, exactly as Eldridge had described, was the safe. Matte gray, heavy, mechanical. Jasmine exhaled once, centered herself, and began turning the dial. 3 dots, 8 1 dot, dot dot 592. She paused, then pulled the handle. The safe door opened with a soft hiss, like the vault itself had been holding its breath. Inside was no cash, no gold bars, just stacks of files, an unmarked USB drive, and a sealed envelope thick with weight and time. Jasmine reached in carefully, lifting out the contents one by one. The top file was labeled Hayes, Phase 3 Expansion. Inside were printed blueprints of development zones flagged for accelerated approval, all signed by mid-level city planners, names Jasmine recognized. Attached to one blueprint was a sticky note: "Get Carver to sign off next week. Hayes wants it buried fast." Her fingers gripped tighter. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't gossip. These were instructions. A step-by-step guide to corruption, typed and time-stamped. Next came the USB. Jasmine passed it to one of the agents, who plugged it into a secure laptop. The screen lit up, displaying a folder structure so detailed it looked like an internal server. Decades of records, wire transfer logs, coded communications between shell companies, and a digital memo marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only." She opened it. The first email read like a confession. Body: Carver handled the zoning issue. Expect funds to clear by next Friday. Use account ending in 9187. Make sure Elena doesn't talk. Jasmine blinked once, letting the nausea pass. There it was, plain as day. Carver, Hayes, money, threats, buried lives. This was never just one case, she murmured. This was an industry. She clicked into the next folder, labeled Judicial Assets. There, lined up like trading cards, were profiles of officials, judges, council members, planning directors, each with a column of coded entries. Jasmine recognized most of the names. Under Carver's file, one entry stood out: 3 expedited permits, 2 sealed motions suppressed, 1 dissent silenced, $200,000 disbursed. Her breath caught, silenced. What did that mean? She opened the sealed envelope last. Inside were printed emails, hand-marked with red pen. One of them bore the city seal. It was a memo from Councilman Hayes himself, on official letterhead. The language was clinical, cold, and explosive. We can't afford public resistance on the West Point project. Find a sympathetic judge. Carver will do if he gets the reassignment. Remind him where the checks come from. Below that, in handwriting, if Crockett shows up again, shut her down. Quietly, the room went still. An agent looked up, his face pale. They tried to take you out of this before it started. Jasmine didn't look away from the page. They tried 5 years ago. They failed. Her voice was calm, not because she wasn't angry, but because she had finally confirmed what she always suspected. This system wasn't broken. It was rigged. Outside the office, lights from downtown flickered like camera flashes. But inside, Jasmine was building something far more dangerous than headlines. She was assembling the bones of a machine that had quietly fed on the city for years. And now she had names, she had files, she had proof. An agent leaned over the laptop. This is enough to indict half the zoning board, 3 judges, and at least a dozen donors, he said. With this and Eldridge's cooperation, we'll have a clean shot at Hayes. He paused. But he's smart, paranoid. He'll know we're coming. Jasmine nodded slowly. Then we don't come quietly. She looked back at the safe, at the documents, the emails, the silent testimony of years of theft disguised as policy. These weren't just papers. They were the receipts of betrayal, of communities displaced, voices silenced, futures sold off for bonuses and backdoor deals. And now, they were hers. Jasmine closed the folder, tucked it under her arm, and turned to the agents. Get me a full warrant, every office Hayes has touched, every consultant, every fund, every committee. I want to know what he's planning next before he even wakes up tomorrow. She looked one agent in the eye. If he gets ahead of this, we lose everything. As they left the office, the corridor behind them now dark again, Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the real war. Because Carver was just a symptom. Eldridge was just the delivery system. But Hayes was the disease, and Jasmine had just found the cure. The message came at 11:42 p.m. One line, no signature. Midnight, Pier 17, bring the rest. It was from one of Hayes' burner accounts, forwarded from a flagged IP address inside City Hall. FBI analysts decoded it within minutes. Jasmine didn't need translation. She knew exactly what it meant. Hayes was scared. He'd realized the walls were closing in, and now, like every guilty man with too much to lose, he was about to make his final move. Not a press conference. Not a backdoor negotiation. He was going to erase it all. Files, documents, records, and the man who kept it clean for him. The cleaner, the one Eldridge only dared to whisper about. Jasmine stared at the message for a full second before speaking. He's going to burn the evidence, she said. We're not going to let him. By 11:50, a full tactical team was mobilized. Unmarked vans rolled out like quiet thunder, headlights off, radios low. Jasmine rode in the lead SUV, eyes scanning the coastline as the industrial docks came into view. Rows of rusting containers, empty warehouses, and a deep black silence that swallowed light. Pier 17 wasn't just forgotten. It was designed to be forgotten. No cameras, no security, no questions, just shadows and wind. And tonight, the sound of justice coming for a man who had eluded it for decades. They positioned early, agents fanned out, taking cover behind crates, vehicles, and the massive iron skeletons of dormant cranes. The dock reeked of salt, rust, and something older, corruption. Jasmine stood behind a loading platform, radio in hand, body still. The clock ticked. 11:57, then 11:59. Then footsteps. At first faint, then sharper, slower, intentional. A black Mercedes rolled onto the dock, headlights cutting through the dark like blades. The car stopped 20 feet from the water. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Councilman Daniel Hayes, dressed in a dark trench coat, briefcase in hand, no tie, no entourage. Just one man carrying a lifetime of secrets in a leather case. He scanned the area cautiously, clearly trying to spot anyone who didn't belong. Then he walked slowly toward the end of the pier. Another figure emerged from the shadows, a man in gray, tall, wiry, gloved. The cleaner. They met under the only dock light still working, their silhouettes distorted by the fog curling in from the bay. Jasmine watched through binoculars. The agent beside her whispered, "We wait for the handoff, then we move." Hayes opened the briefcase. Inside, files, hard drives, 2 sealed envelopes marked confidential, and 1 black USB stick with a red sticker. The cleaner reached for the documents, and then everything lit up. Blinding floodlights exploded to life from every angle, slicing through the night and painting the pier in harsh white. "FBI, drop everything and put your hands in the air." The command came over bullhorns. Instantly, agents surged from every hiding place, boots slamming on steel, rifles drawn, laser sights dancing across the darkness. Hayes staggered back, the briefcase slipping from his grip, scattering documents across the wet concrete like ash from a fire. He ran, not toward the car, but away, into the maze of shipping containers, slipping through the cracks like a rat. "Target on foot," someone shouted. Jasmine was already moving, weaving through agents, her coat flaring behind her. The cleaner dropped to the ground, hands up. He didn't even try. Hayes, however, still thought he could outrun judgment, but judgment was faster. 2 agents flanked left. Another cut across the yard. Jasmine rounded a container and spotted him climbing a ladder on a service scaffold, desperate to get higher ground, somewhere to disappear. "Hayes!" she yelled, her voice echoing. "It's over!" He didn't stop. He reached the top, panting, eyes wild. "You don't know what you're doing," he screamed. "This city needs men like me. I built this city." His foot slipped. He stumbled. But the agents were already there. They reached him, pinned him against the metal rail, and forced his arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked. Another king unseated. Jasmine stepped forward as they walked him down the scaffold. Hayes didn't scream like Carver. He didn't weep like Eldridge. He just looked hollow, like a man who realized too late that power doesn't make you untouchable. It only makes your fall louder. Back at the processing center, the cleaner cracked first. Within 40 minutes, he had given up names, dates, drop points, and digital storage locations. His phone contained 2 terabytes of encrypted communications, all linked to Hayes' network, city contracts, judge placements, funding routes through shell companies masquerading as youth programs and redevelopment projects. The Hayes machine. That's what they called it internally. A spider web of fake charities, buried amendments, and vote trading schemes that reached every corner of city government. By sunrise, 3 more officials had been placed on administrative leave. One was already on a plane out of the country. But Jasmine wasn't watching the news. She sat quietly in the evidence room, staring at the briefcase Hayes dropped, its contents now tagged and sealed. Inside was a letter, handwritten in ink, addressed to D.H. It began with the words, "Carver took care of it. The girl won't be a problem." Her fingers tightened, because that girl had just dismantled an empire, and she was far from done. Outside, the sun was rising over the city city that once looked down on her, judged her, tried to silence her. But now it would have to reckon with her, because the system had fed on silence, and Jasmine Crockett had just broken it. It was a trial unlike any the city had ever seen. The media dubbed it the Tribunal of Titans. But behind the headlines and flashing cameras, everyone knew what it really was. The reckoning. In courtroom 6B, usually reserved for high-profile federal disputes, 3 seats sat side by side at the defense table. In those seats were 3 men who had once wielded invisible power across every branch of the city's infrastructure. Raymond Carver, Thomas Eldridge, Councilman Daniel Hayes. A judge, a tycoon, and a lawmaker, men who once operated like gods in tailored suits, now reduced to numbered inmates in matching beige jumpsuits. No robes, no Rolexes, no illusions. The trial began with the kind of silence that vibrated. Hundreds of pages of evidence had already been entered into the record. Digital logs, wire transfers, signed memos, audio files, and federal testimonies so damning they didn't just implicate, they convicted. Jasmine didn't need to say a word to the press that day. The evidence had already said enough. Her name was on every affidavit. Her strategy lined every exhibit binder. Her fingerprints were on the very framework of the case. But she sat in the back row of the courtroom, unassuming, dressed in black, not as a performer, but as the storm that had already passed. When the prosecution began, they didn't start with Eldridge's finances or Carver's sealed orders. They began with the victims, the displaced families from West Point, the city workers blackballed for questioning permits, the whistleblowers whose careers vanished. They painted the corruption not as an abstract scheme, but as a human cost. A child who lost access to public school after a development bulldozed his neighborhood. An elderly woman forced from her home after property taxes skyrocketed due to false land valuations. Real names, real faces, real loss. Carver's defense tried to claim memory lapses and procedural loopholes. Eldridge's team argued he was just a financier and had no criminal intent. Hayes? He went full denial. Political hit job, his lawyer called it. A vendetta orchestrated by a woman with ambition and a grudge. But the jurors didn't flinch. Not once. They'd read the memos. They'd heard the recordings. They saw the bank statements. They knew about the cleaner at the docks, the coded emails, the midnight briefcase, the fear in Eldridge's voice when he confessed Hayes' name. And they'd heard Jasmine Crockett's closing argument, one she gave not with fire, but with stone. When power is used to crush the voiceless, she had said, it no longer serves justice. It becomes its enemy. These men didn't just take bribes or manipulate zoning laws. They sold trust. They privatized silence. And when someone dared to challenge them, they used the system not to protect the people, but to punish those who tried. Her voice was low, not loud, not dramatic, just pure weight. Justice isn't something the powerful define. It's something the brave fight for. And today, we fight. It took the jury 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom felt like it might explode under its own gravity. The clerk stood. The foreperson read the verdicts one by one. Raymond Carver, guilty. Thomas Eldridge, guilty. Councilman Daniel Hayes, guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, misuse of public office. Carver received the harshest sentence, 45 years without parole. The judge who once barked at lawyers like insects would now spend decades taking orders in a cell. Eldridge got 32 years, and Hayes, once a mayoral frontrunner, received 38. None of them spoke as they were let out in cuffs. None of them made eye contact with Jasmine. The press lost its mind. Headlines erupted. The empire collapses. The trial that shook the city. Jasmine Crockett topples the untouchables. News vans blanketed the courthouse steps. Microphones swarmed like bees. But Jasmine didn't walk through the front. She exited quietly through the side hall, her coat drawn tight, her face unreadable. A junior reporter chased after her. Ms. Crockett, just a word. Are you going to run for office now? She called. Jasmine paused for a breath, then kept walking. She didn't come for a headline. She came for justice. Later that evening, the courtroom staff returned to find something unexpected mounted outside the doors of 6B. A bronze plaque, freshly polished, newly installed. It wasn't large, it wasn't grand, but the engraving carved into it was sharp, deliberate, cut with the precision of someone who meant every word. Justice is not what the powerful say, it is what the brave are willing to fight for. There was no signature, no attribution, just the words. But everyone knew who they belonged to. The judges who came after would read that plaque every morning before stepping behind the bench. Lawyers would run their fingers across it for courage before opening difficult cases. And those who had been silenced, who had lost homes, jobs, dignity, would see it and remember that even in a system built to protect the corrupt, truth could still rise. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her apartment, the city's lights blinking outside her window like a heartbeat that had steadied after years of racing. She held a simple photo in her hand, her younger self 5 years ago, in handcuffs, humiliated, wrongfully arrested by the same machines she had just dismantled. She wasn't smiling, but there was peace in her eyes now. She didn't need revenge. She had reclaimed the law, and that was enough, because this story wasn't about one courtroom, one trial, or even 3 guilty men. It was about something bigger, something built slowly, brick by brick, on the backs of the forgotten. And Jasmine? She had cracked its foundation wide open. The city would never forget the fall of Carver, Eldridge, and Hayes. But more importantly, it would never again underestimate the power of a woman who refused to stay silent. For some, stories like Jasmine Crockett's feel like fiction, crafted in the minds of storytellers who want us to believe that the system can be bent back into shape. But what if it's not fiction? What if it's a mirror? Because in real life, the men at the top do fall, and when they do, it's not in private. It's in handcuffs under courtroom lights with the whole country watching. You don't need to look far back to find the proof. Take the case of Judge Harry Claiborne, a man who once ruled his courtroom like a king, arrogant, untouchable. He was appointed to the federal bench by a U.S. president, but beneath the robe, Claiborne was taking bribes from a brothel owner, fixing tax cases, hiding behind procedure. For years, no one dared challenge him. Sound familiar? But justice caught up. In 1986, Claiborne became the first federal judge in U.S. history to be impeached and removed while still sitting on the bench. Imagine that, an active federal judge being led away while still wearing the robe, because the law finally pushed back. No more gavels, no more immunity. Just a man with a hand in the wrong pockets, exposed by the very truth he thought he could bury. Men over 50 know what this feels like. When someone thinks they've played the game so long, they become the rules. But Claiborne's fall was a reminder. The law doesn't forget, it waits. And when the right person stands up, even a judge can be judged. And it's not just judges. Power corrupts in every office. Look at Kwame Kilpatrick, the once celebrated mayor of Detroit. Young, charismatic, hailed as the future of the city, he stood on podiums talking about change, reform, opportunity. But behind the speeches, behind the cameras, there were secret deals, personal favors, and millions of dollars in public funds being siphoned into private pockets. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier it got. Racketeering, extortion, bribery. It wasn't just political betrayal, it was theft, on the backs of taxpayers, city workers, and working-class families. And in 2013, Kilpatrick stood before a federal judge, not as a leader, but as a criminal. 28 years in prison. No applause, no spin. Just a cold verdict and the clang of justice locking shut. That's the sound many men know well. The moment when talk no longer matters. When the handshake deals and backroom whispers get pulled into the light. What Kilpatrick learned too late is what many already understand. True leadership isn't about being untouchable, it's about being accountable. So no, this story you followed isn't fantasy. It's a warning. It's a reminder that corruption, no matter how dressed up in legalese or political polish, always rots from the inside. And the people who dare to face it, people like Jasmine, or the real agents and attorneys who fight behind the scenes, aren't chasing fairy tales. They're chasing justice with grit, sacrifice, and steel in their spine. And if you've ever looked around and wondered, is anyone even watching the watchers? This story is your answer. Yes, someone is. And if we're lucky, there are still people out there willing to light a match in a room full of gas, because they'd rather risk the explosion than keep breathing poison. That's not fiction. That's the fight for America. Corruption isn't a plot twist. It's not a screenwriter's invention or the paranoid fantasy of conspiracy theorists. It's real. It breathes. It wears suits. It shakes hands in back rooms, smiles for cameras, and signs documents with ink that erases accountability. Corruption doesn't show up wearing a mask. It wears a badge, a title, a judge's robe, a mayor's lapel pin. It hides in routine, cloaks itself in process, and feeds off silence. And perhaps the most dangerous lie ever sold to the American people is that it's rare, that it's exceptional, that it's someone else's problem. But men like Carver, Eldridge, and Hayes prove otherwise. They didn't break the system. They were the system. Carver didn't just bend justice, he sold it. Eldridge didn't just launder money, he buried communities under concrete. Hayes didn't just take bribes, he rewired city government like a machine with no brakes and no conscience. These weren't monsters from fiction. They were respected, protected, elevated, and for years they walked freely while the people beneath their reach paid the price. Not with money, but with homes, with jobs, with trust. So no, corruption isn't distant. It's not the villain in a thriller. It's the smile at a ribbon cutting, the speech about growth, the zoning permit signed at midnight when no one's looking. And if you're a man who's worked a job, raised a family, served your country, or built something with your bare hands, you know what injustice feels like. Not because someone wrote it in a novel, but because somewhere along the way, you watched a good man lose a contract to a crooked deal. You saw a neighbor lose his pension while the board got bonuses. You remember the quiet fury of knowing something was wrong, but being told to let it go, don't stir the pot. It's just the way things are. But what Jasmine Crockett's story reminds us is that the system doesn't fix itself. Because justice doesn't come from the system, it comes from someone brave enough to confront it when it's wrong. Systems don't have hearts. Bureaucracies don't feel guilt. Institutions don't dream of doing the right thing. But people do. One person, then two, then three. That's how it starts. Not with a movement, not with a speech, but with one individual who chooses to risk everything. Not because they're fearless, but because they refuse to live in fear anymore. Jasmine was mocked, laughed out of courtrooms, threatened, silenced. She was arrested by the same machine she would later dismantle. And she didn't win because the system suddenly grew a conscience. She won because she didn't walk away, because she came back. She did the work. She asked the questions no one wanted to answer. And she kept asking until the lies cracked and the truth spilled out into the light. That's what real justice looks like. Not pretty, not polite. It's messy, loud. And sometimes it walks in with scars from the last battle. And if you're a man who's seen enough to know the world doesn't always reward honesty, you understand what it costs to stand up. It's not a slogan. It's a sacrifice. It means going against friends, losing opportunities, being called difficult, dangerous, idealistic. But the moment you stop fighting is the moment corruption wins. Not because it's stronger, but because it's patient. The men who sit on thrones of lies count on good people staying quiet. They depend on fatigue, on cynicism, on that voice in your head that says, you can't change it. But that's the lie. You can, because the story doesn't belong to the system. It belongs to the ones who resist it. So if you're sitting at home right now, gray in the beard, lines in your hands from decades of work, and wondering what your part is in this world of noise and corruption, let me tell you, you're still needed. Your clarity, your values, your courage. You don't have to be a lawyer or an agent or a public figure. You just have to be one man who doesn't flinch when the pressure comes. One man who looks at a system built on silence and says, not this time, because the next Jasmine out there, she's watching, and whether she stands or breaks depends on whether someone like you believes she should keep going. Corruption thrives when people think they can't win, but justice only needs one spark. And if you've lived long enough, you know how dangerous a man becomes when he's got nothing left to prove. Just a fire in his gut and a truth worth defending. That's what ends empires, not mobs. Men who remember who they are. So let them call it fiction. Let them say it's exaggerated, theatrical, impossible. You know better, because you've seen what silence protects, and you've felt what courage demands, and now it's your turn to stand with the ones who don't run. Because justice isn't what the powerful define, it's what the brave choose to fight for. And if that doesn't sound like you, then maybe it's time to remember who you used to be. before they told you to sit down. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.